All right, let's talk National League Baseball. The Mets and the Braves are tied in their division. They have 2 games left to play in their best of 3. These are essentially playoff games. This is some of the most exciting and compelling regular season baseball you're ever going to see. This is the height of a pennant race, and I just want to jump in and sort of talk about those teams, and then we'll talk about the rest of the NL after. So the Braves. The first thing you need to know about the Braves is Freddie Freeman walked in the offseason and he was their star hard carry player for years. Now they have Austin Riley, who's sort of the guy in the offense that has taken over that role. He's insanely good, really underrated player, Austin Riley, top 5 in the NL in homers. And he's one of these guys that doesn't necessarily get as much credit and as much like national attention as he deserves because he's been putting up the numbers all season long, and he's a hell of a player. Their ace is the hard-throwing lefty Max Fried, who has a hell of a curveball, a genuine 12-6 Sandy Koufax-like hook. He's been incredible. He's a very good pitcher, reliable and playoff tested. But if we look at the Braves pitching, there are some things that I want to talk about. The health of Mike Soroka. Mike Soroka was a god-tier hard carry ace 3 or 4 years ago, and he's since been severely banged up, tore his Achilles, had a setback, missed a ton of time, and now he's having arm trouble. This looked like one of the best young pitchers in the game, so it's really tragic, and hopefully Mike Soroka can recover and be ready for next season. Remember, Charlie Morton got hurt last year in the playoffs. He's really old and throws a lot of curveballs, but this is a playoff-tested guy that you can really rely on. Kyle Wright, underrated, just a guy that you never really hear about and doesn't get any hype. There's a lot of guys like that on the Braves who are really good and consistent and stay healthy and eat up a lot of innings, in this case for the pitchers. But one guy that was incredible is Spencer Strider, who got hurt and is probably not going to be available for the playoffs at full strength. And this guy's a strikeout machine. He was top 5 in the NL in strikeouts, vicious slider, really hard thrower. And the Braves, with Soroka and Strider both going down, are going to be at a disadvantage as far as like the playoff rotation they sort of were thinking that they were going to get back a month ago. And that's a big deal. When you're playing these best of 7s and best of 5s against teams like the Dodgers and the Mets, and they're throwing people at you like Max Scherzer, Jacob deGrom, Clayton Kershaw. I know he's a little bit washed, but you have to be able to counter with your own really good starter. And the Braves had one of the best pitching rotations in the entire league, but it got beaten up by injuries real bad in September, so that's just one thing that you have to consider about the Braves, is their starting pitching isn't as scary as it usually is. Kinley Jansen's had a career resurgence. He looked sort of bad with his last year with the Dodgers. Colin McHugh's been great. AJ Minter's been great. Jesse Cervez, who's 38 and looked not very good for years and years, has a 2.13 ERA. This team had Tyler Matzik down there as well, and they traded for Raciel Iglesias, who used to be the Angels closer and is really sick. He's been lights out. I mean, look at his fucking ERA, .39 since joining the Braves. Man, if you're like the one good pitcher on the Angels, it just feels so great to be able to go to a roster like Atlanta where you're not asked to hard carry every single game, as far as like you're in the bullpen and you're the only guy out there that can shut the door. Darren O'Day, the right-handed sidewinder, and really one of the most important parts of both of the Rangers pennant teams back in 2010 and 2011, had a severe injury. He's not going to be available for the playoffs. Look at Kirby Yates down here. Hurt again. He'll probably never be the same compared to how he was 4 years ago. He's just constantly hurt. But if we want to talk about the offense of the Braves, I obviously already mentioned Austin Riley. Michael Davis is this young kid, like their top prospect. He's been fucking incredible. And the Braves are really good at signing these plucky youngsters to very team-friendly deals. They sort of give them a bunch of money before they prove it. And they like, oh yeah, 8 years, I'll take all that stability. Sure, of course I'll sign the contract. But that's just how you have a bunch of really good players year in and year out as you lock down your young stars. Speaking of young stars, Ronald Acuna Jr. hasn't really looked the same since he blew out his knee. He's still really good, but He's not on that like spectacular phenom level. Matt Olson's been solid. There's a lot of like swing and miss in his game, strikes out too much. But this is an offense that is cohesive. It has a lot of pop, and the players work well together. Very scary team, very good team. You can see why they won the World Series last season. Oh, and Dansby Swanson's having a career year in his contract season. So let's talk about the Mets. Obviously, the big moves that the Mets made this offseason were they got Buck Showalter instead of Luis Rojas. And Luis Rojas was a joke. He was a clown to your manager, just a total rube. It's very obvious when the Carlos Beltran scandal happened. The Mets organization panicked, looked around, and said, "Who's the next highest ranked Latin guy in the org?" Because that was such a big selling point. That's all you heard on Carton and Roberts at the time. Oh, Evan Roberts just couldn't get over how great it was that Luis Rojas spoke Spanish, as if that's all you needed to be a good big league manager. Total fraud. And he pissed away and wasted a lot of talent. That Mets roster was not bad. These Mets rosters over the last 6 years have had pitching, going back to the Thor and Harvey days even. And really, they've underachieved. The Mets haven't made the playoffs since 2016 when they made the wild card game, and they had a pitcher's duel with the Giants that ended in a hilarious walk-off. The Addison Reed disaster. But if we look at this team, Francisco Lindor has really come into his own. If you remember at the beginning of his Mets tenure, it looked like he wasn't going to be able to cut it in New York. And then Mad Max Scherzer's been great despite the injuries. Jeff McNeil's competing for a batting title. He's one of these players I think that is underrated as far as how much utility he provides defensively and how much he does get on base. He's a good, scrappy player, a hell of a ball player, Jeff McNeil, the squirrel. Brandon Nimmo's been great, always bats for a high average, has a disciplined approach. Pete Alonso, a guy with a lot of pop, the guy you slot into the middle of your lineup. And he broke Mike Piazza's single-season RBI record, Pete Alonso did. 40 jimmies. I mean, the Polar Bear is a premier power hitter in this game and a guy that you really love to put in the middle of that lineup. Starling Marte has been great, but he's been hurt. And the Mets have sort of faltered in September a little bit, and so much of that has to do with Starling Marte being hurt. This was a talented player that would consistently get on base and could steal a base and was great defensively, had a lot of range, played every day. You pencil him into the 2-hole. When you have a really consistent 2-hole hitter like Marte that doesn't necessarily strike out as much as a lot of other players in the league and has speed too, it's a huge asset. Notice his OPS here, it's above 800, so very valuable asset, and it was intelligent of them to attack Marte in free agency. Chris Bassett is an innings eater. If we go to the Mets pitching here, obviously everyone thinks about Scherzer and DeGrom because they're the aces and the guys that are going to start 1 and 2 when the Mets get into the playoffs, whether that be a wild card or the division series. But Chris Bassett is underrated because he eats so many innings. And he's done it to a 3.27 ERA, which I think that if you ask people what Chris Bassett's ERA was, a lot of people would maybe guess 4.2 and not 3.2. Taijuan Walker's been pretty solid. Carrasco's been hit or miss and a little bit banged up. But I think one of the biggest differences with the Mets this season is the bullpen. Now, originally when the Mets got Edwin Diaz from the Mariners, he didn't look good at all. His signature move was giving up a big bomb and like pointing up in the sky like it was a pop-up. I just love to watch that. This season, coming out to the Timmy Trumpet song, he's been god tier. He's been absolutely incredible. ERA plus 287. If you're not familiar with OPS plus and ERA plus, 100 is average and higher is always better, even with ERA. Though he's been almost 3 times as good as like the average like replacement level player. Adam Ottavino has found his groove again. He's got that slider working. He's a right-handed slider specialist. And he once said he could strike out Babe Ruth 3 times in a row. Seth Lugo has been the most consistent Mets bullpen arm over like the last 5 years. Lugo, through thick and thin, through Diaz being bad and starting pitchers going down, Lugo has been one of the most valuable Mets. And then you have a bunch of guys who really aren't as impressive. The Mets bullpen really isn't that deep. Trevor Williams, underrated, but I mean, you're not going to trust David Peterson or Joely Rodriguez. So what you have is a team that's very top-heavy pitching-wise, and starting pitchers can hard carry you in playoff baseball. Look at the 2001 Arizona Diamondbacks with Schilling and Johnson, god-tier team, and they hard carried them through the whole playoffs and through the World Series, and they both won MVP. So when I look at this Mets team, one thing that sort of worries me is like the bullpen depth. But the Mets and Braves are two incredible teams, and they're obviously both clinched playoff spots, but it's so important to win the division because of the new playoff format. If you win the division, you go right into the NLDS. You don't have to mess around with best of threes. You can rest Scherzer and DeGrom. And if you look at the Braves versus the Mets in this epic NL East pennant race, the Mets need to win the division more than the Braves. Like that, as far as like the importance of it, as far as the rosters or how their rosters are constructed, it's way more important for the Mets to do it because they rely on two pitchers who, quite frankly, this season have been fragile. Obviously, DeGrom's hurt all the fucking time, and Mad Max, even though he's a super consistent hard carry ace, is a guy who has been banged up this season. Mark Canha's been good for the Mets too. Him and Matt Olson are both underrated. Those A's players, man, they never get enough credit. But yep, that's what I think about the Mets. These are the games that I've been like most excited for all season, and I'm really excited that the Mets are back in the playoffs because the Mets are like a soap opera for men. They're just such like a funny clown show, and I just can't get enough of it as a baseball fan. Because if they're always terrible and always miss the playoffs, the like it sort of loses its appeal and its effect. It's like if you're watching a TV show that like it's like Tom and Jerry, like he's never gonna catch the mouse. So if the Mets never make the playoffs, like laughing at their plight isn't as fun. Like they've got to do good every now and then to make it interesting. And their 2015 run was one of my favorites in baseball history with peak Matt Harvey. So that's the NL East talk. Talk about the Central here a touch. Well, actually, we should talk about the rest of the East first. The Phillies have 84 wins. They shit-canned Girardi and have been doing great ever since. Bryce Harper is where you're going to start with this team. He's the hard carry ace, and when I say ace, obviously that's a term that's usually associated with pitchers, but he's the stalwart of the offense. He's the carry, and he's one of the most fun players to watch. He's actually my favorite current player in the NL, and just an incredible signing by them. And he's going to, unless he's hurt, which he did break his hand earlier this season when Blake Snell buzzed him. But when he's healthy, he's going to put up his numbers. And that's a guy you can pencil in at 3 or 4 every night, and it's going to just be super consistent. He's going to sell season ticket packages, and he's a substantive player. It's not just like a flashy gimmick pick. It was just a great contract. Ichiro Realmuto, the best catcher in the league, a catcher with steals. The first catcher since Ivan Pudge Rodriguez hit 20 homers and steal 20 bases. Pudge did it back in '99. Realmuto is also a really good defender. Another great signing. Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler are the Phillies' sort of aces, and to me, this is why the Phillies are a dangerous team in the playoffs, because for years the Phillies have choked and made fools of themselves and missed the playoffs, but the way that it's sort of looking now is they're going to make the playoffs, and those top-heavy rotations are actually better in best of threes. Obviously, pitching is the name of the game anytime, but if you never have to go to a third starter potentially, you see Wheeler and Nola, it could be scary. Rhys Hoskins has stayed healthy this year. He's sort of Bryce Harper's lineup protection is how I view him. Ranger Suarez was great out of the pen last season, and he's been really solid this season. The Phillies have always needed pitching, and they've always been like a real top-heavy team without depth. They have an atrocious farm system. Fucking no one down there. So to have Rodriguez come in and be effective was huge, or Ranger Suarez rather, I misspoke. And of course, Zach Wheeler throws really hard, vicious changeup. And Kyle Ace Gibson was a guy who's been really disappointing for them. Noah Thor Syndergaard, both of these cats used to be considered exceptional, but have been sort of disappointing. If they can get it together, that's actually a really scary rotation. Now, for years, the Phillies have not had a bullpen. And last season, it was like Archie Bradley and his big beard and Hector Neris coming in having no fucking idea where the ball was going. And it was a disaster. And this season, they sort of put all their hopes in that Corey Knebel fella who's hurt. So now the bullpen is just sort of trying to be cobbled together. Brad Hand is hurt. He's another name guy that's been good. And this team just doesn't have the bullpen to compete in the playoffs, straight up. Because in the playoffs, obviously, like starting pitching is the most important thing, and then bullpen's really important too, especially in the last 10 years as opposed to like, the 60s and 70s. It's a more bullpen-heavy metagame. And the Phillies are going to have to get a lot out of their starters. It's as simple as that. But I like the lineup if we look at OPS plus. Obviously, I've talked about the catcher and Harper already. Hoskins useful. Kyle Schwarber strikes out way too much, but he has a lot of pop. Gene Segura's been solid this season. Alec Boehm is coming into his own. Nick Castellanos has been a big fucking disappointment. This was like the premier corner outfielder this offseason. He was a free agent and been pretty shit. Okay, so the Phillies, they're a good team, but they're probably not going to make it far in the playoffs if they don't choke their spot away, which they've been trying to do, because if we look down here, we can see that Milwaukee with 84 wins is really challenging for that spot. We'll talk about them in a second. The Marlins are a joke. They have some good young pitching like Sandy Alcantara and Sixto Sanchez, but they're a fucking joke. It was funny because for years what we heard about this team was like, oh, I have all these great young players, and when the players get ready, they're going to buy big and compete. Well, the young arms are supposed to come into their own this season, and they intentionally didn't sign anyone during the offseason. Derek Jeter said, fuck this, and left, and if you just sort by OPS plus, that really does say it all. They have no offense at all. No offense at all. Disgusting. The Nationals are the worst team in the league. They are really bizarrely just in complete free fall and sort of like pseudo rebuilding. They gave away Juan Soto for Chiclets, and this is just a sewer roster. They have one of the worst contracts in the league with Patrick Corbin. Look at these stats: 200 hits, 112 runs, a 63 ERA plus. They're paying this guy like $25 million a year to suck chode for money. 6 ERA. This team has the worst starter ERA in baseball. Look at that, Anibal Sanchez still kicking it around. So they're a disgrace. It is the most exciting division in baseball, despite the bottom two teams being like a fucking joke. So the Cardinals are good again, big fucking surprise. And the Cardinals, why are they good, you might ask? Well, Nolan Arenado's been great. He got traded for Chiclets. Goldschmidt was great. It looked like he was flirting with the MVP halfway through the season, but he's cooled off. Tommy Edmonds been great. 6 WAR, Jesus Christ. Brendan Donovan. They have a lot of like, look at Albert's like 2011 file photo. They have a lot of like young, sneaky, good pitching. So if we sort by OPS plus here, Albert's been their third best hitter. This was a guy who, during his time with the Angels, looked hard washed and completely fucking useless. The Dodgers gave him a second chance after the Angels just like rudely sloughed him off. He's been great, and congrats to him for hitting 700. It's crazy. I mean, that's a big fucking deal. Only Barry, Hank Aaron, and the Babe have fucking hit 700 plus, so well played by him. Adam Wainwright still kicking it around and doing pretty well. This is a lineup that you don't see a lot of name guys necessarily, but look at this. This Miles Malokis is pretty solid, but this is not a team that's going to compete for a deep playoff run. They're going to get absolutely decimated in the first round. Milwaukee's a weird one because they never really have the offense to cut it. And if we look at their offense, the thing that jumps out at you is how disappointing Christian Yelich has been since he hurt his back. That back injury sapped him of all of his power like Don Mattingly. And this is a team with a lot of pitching. If we look at ERA plus, Devin Williams with this changeup is basically unhittable. Hopefully he doesn't punch the wall again going into the playoffs. Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff, a hell of a 1-2 punch. Brad Boxberger's a solid bullpen arm. Brent Suter's pretty good too. But this team, it has some promise, but it's not deep enough and doesn't have the offensive pop. They would be dangerous in like a short best-of-3 series, though, because of their pitching. Alright, so the rest of this joke division, the Cubs were one of the worst teams in baseball for the first few months, but they've looked a little better since then. I mean, there's nothing to talk about here. The Reds sold all their good players on purpose, basically tanking. They're a disgrace. The Pirates, LOL. Alright, so let's talk about the fucking Dodgers, who have been hit hard with injuries, and they're so insanely stacked it doesn't matter. So, Dustin May hasn't looked as good as he did before he blew his arm out. The slider sinker specialist Blake Trinan's hurt. They put Tony Gosselin on the IL for arm problems. A lot of people speculated it was just to keep him healthy for October, but Brusdar Graterol looks banged up. But like, I mean, just look at this roster and it's disgusting. They have so many really good players or guys like Chris Martin who have been good in the past, but now he's fucking having a career season. It's just insane. Like the Dodgers, they have so much money, they have so much depth, they're so well coached. They even got David Price to be good again. I didn't even think that was possible. That the Dodgers bullpen has like more established, like talented veterans than like any bullpen I've ever seen before. And then they have a bunch of guys like Brusdar Graterol and Dustin May, who you might not have heard of if you're not a hardcore baseball fan, but are insane. They're like 102-mile-an-hour sinkers, but this is what I'm talking about. Like, yeah, Trinan's hurt, but they still have so much depth. Dustin May hurt again. It's just crazy. It's almost dizzying. And their offense is the same way. Look at this. Freddie Freeman, God tier, like MVP candidate. Mookie Betts, like a top 10 player in the game for years, super consistent. Will Smith, the second best catcher in the NL, the JT Realmuto. Trey Turner, like a speed flea terror of a player that plays good defense and gets on base all the time. Justin Redbeard Turner has been great for years, and he's 37. And that's crazy to me that he's 37, because he still plays like a kid. Max Muncy, a lot of pop. Chris Taylor's sort of a goof, and I don't know what the hell's going on with Cody Bellinger. He fell off a cliff, but this is obviously the favorite to win the World Series. They're just insanely deep. And this video is almost over. We're going to talk about the Padres, though. They got Bob Melvin, which was the biggest thing they did in the offseason. And then, of course, they went out and got Soto. Remember, this is a team playing without Tatis because he got caught juicing. Yu Darvish has been great. I'm glad he sort of found a career resurgence. But remember, he's a playoff choker. See the 2016 ALDS. Jokic Jurickson, they squeezed 3 WAR out of him. Joe Musgrove's underrated. And Blake Snell's solid, hard-throwing lefty, playoff proven. They went out and got Soto and Josh Hader at the deadline, and they've both been kind of bad. Or at least like worse than how you would think of those players at their peak. Machado's been great. Eric the Hosmer, he's been cute too. And they have guys who you would think like, oh, whatever happened to like Luke Voigt? And then you're like, oh, he's on the Padres. Like, oh, whatever happened to oh, he's on the Padres. Like they have a lot of established veterans. To me, when I look at this team, like the bullpen worries me. Like they don't have the consistent bullpen arms to go out there and consistently win in the postseason. And Sean Manaea has been fucking terrible. Obviously, they tried to shore that up with Hader, but you can't really trust him. The Giants, they obviously regressed. Like everyone who with a brain knew they were going to regress hard. Carlos Rendon has been god tier. That's the only thing that's worth saying about this team. Arizona's been way better than a lot of people expected, and Zach Gallen's really good. The Rockies are a joke and can only win at home. So that's the video. I'm super excited for Mets Braves. Stay easy.